It was the night of July 13, 1966. 8 young women, all nursing students, had gathered together in a modest townhouse on East 100th Street in Chicago. Some were already asleep, others were laughing quietly, sharing stories, thinking about their future careers. None of them could have guessed that lurking nearby was a man with a dark plan, a man who would go down in history as one of America's most notorious killers, Richard Speck. Welcome to my channel. My name is Chrissy, and I typically discuss things that are strange, mysterious, and creepy. If that interests you, then please subscribe or follow me. If you enjoy this video, hit the like button, leave me a comment, or share this video with a friend. That really helps out a small channel like mine. Okay, now let's get back to the story. To understand how that quiet Chicago townhouse became the site of such horror, we need to go back in time. It's to the early years of Richard Speck's life. Born on December 6, 1941, in Kirkwood, Illinois, Speck was the 7th of 8 children. His early childhood was difficult but relatively stable. His father, Benjamin, was a hard-working man, a factory worker with a reputation for being strict but loving, and his mother, Mary, was known to be a devoted parent. But all of that changed in 1947, when Richard was just 6 years old. Benjamin Speck suddenly died of a heart attack. This loss sent shockwaves through the family, and it would mark the beginning of Richard's descent into violence and crime. Not long after Benjamin's death, Mary remarried a man named Carl Lindbergh, a man with a drinking problem and a long rap sheet. Carl was abusive and harsh, and young Richard, who had adored his father, quickly grew to despise his stepfather. Throughout his teenage years, Speck became increasingly angry, turning to alcohol and getting into frequent fights. At the age of 16, he dropped out of school, a decision that would further fuel his spiral into crime. By his late teens, Richard Speck was already well acquainted with the law. He'd been arrested more than 40 times for a series of petty crimes: burglary, disorderly conduct, assault. To his family and the few people who knew him, he was a troublemaker, but nothing could have hinted at the kind of monstrous violence he was capable of. In the summer of 1966, Speck made his way to Chicago. He had no money, no job, no real plan. By now, he'd been drinking heavily for years, and he was prone to violent outbursts. Just days before the attack, he'd assaulted and robbed a woman in her own home, a crime that would later tie him to the events that would horrify the city. On the evening of July 13, 1966, Speck, drunk and desperate, broke into a townhouse in the Jeffery Manor neighborhood of Chicago. Inside, there were 9 young women, all nursing students, ages ranging from 19 to 24. These young women had come from all over the Midwest, studying hard to become nurses, dreaming of helping people, of making a difference. But Speck's entry into their home shattered those dreams in the most brutal way imaginable. Speck held the women hostage at gunpoint, then forced them all into one room. He tied each of them up using strips of bedsheets. As he moved methodically through the townhouse, he ordered the young women to remain silent. But even in the terrifying chaos, one student managed to hide under a bed. Her name was Corazon Amurao, a 23-year-old nursing student from the Philippines, who would later be the only survivor and a crucial witness in the case against Speck. Over the course of hours, Speck did the unimaginable. He murdered each of the young women, one by one, strangling some, stabbing others. Each act was more horrific than the last, and by the time he left, he had claimed the lives of 8 innocent young women. Amurao, still hiding under the bed, managed to stay silent, clutching her hands tightly over her mouth as she listened to the horror unfolding around her. It wasn't until the next morning that police discovered the unimaginable scene inside the townhouse. 8 young women, all killed, all brutally attacked. The news spread quickly, and the city was thrown into a state of shock and fear. But among the devastation, one critical witness remained. Amurao's testimony would later prove invaluable. She described Speck in chilling detail: his height, his tattoos, and most notably a single tattoo on his arm that read, "Born to Raise Hell." That tattoo would later be a key piece of evidence in identifying him. For days, Speck wandered the streets of Chicago, hiding in cheap hotels, drinking, and trying to evade capture. But his time on the run was short-lived. Just a week after the murders, he attempted suicide and was taken to Cook County Hospital. One of the nurses, noticing the infamous tattoo described by a Marau, contacted the police. Finally, after days of terror, Richard Speck was arrested and charged with the murder of 8 nursing students. The trial was one of the most sensational in American history. Corazona Marau took the stand, describing in harrowing detail the events of that night, the fear, the horror, the sheer helplessness. She pointed at Speck, her hands steady as she identified him as the man who had destroyed the lives of her friends. During the trial, the prosecution painted Speck as a man without conscience, a man driven by an urge to kill. His defense attempted to plead insanity, citing his history of alcohol abuse and his troubled past. But the jury saw through it, and in April of 1967, Speck was convicted of 8 counts of murder and sentenced to death. Speck's sentence would later be commuted to life in prison after the Supreme Court struck down the death penalty in Illinois. But life behind bars did little to tame him. Over the years, rumors circulated about his behavior in prison. Some claimed he boasted about the murders, others said he showed no remorse. Disturbingly, a hidden camera video from 1988 even showed him using drugs, wearing women's lingerie, and seeming almost proud of his crimes. In one chilling moment, Speck was heard saying, "If they knew how much fun I was having, they'd turn me loose." On December 5, 1991, Richard Speck died of a heart attack in prison. He was 49 years old. In the years since, he's become a dark symbol, a man whose actions sent waves of terror through Chicago and across the country. To this day, his crimes serve as a stark reminder of the terrifying potential for darkness in the human soul and of the courage it took for one young woman hiding under a bed to survive and bring justice for her friends. Thank you for joining us on this journey into one of America's most chilling true crime cases. Make sure to subscribe for more stories like this one, mysterious events, and other creepy content. Until next time, stay safe, and as always, stay curious.